Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaykum, dear listeners. I hope that you are well wherever you are, wherever you're tuning in from. We have some very lovely spring blossoms and lots of hay fever and allergies going around at the moment in the UK, but it is absolutely gorgeous outside and we're starting to get some more daylight, which is something we absolutely love after a very long, cold winter. So today I will be talking to you about the power of music. I'm sure you've seen the very controversial title to my video, which says quite directly, music is not haram. So I'm going to start from the point that music is not haram. For those of you interested in my understanding of halal and haram and the bounds of moral law that the Qur'an has set for us, please do tune in to day 10 and day 11 of my Ramadan series titled Pondering at the Pond. The series is made up of short videos which are very focused and pick up a single point of reflection every time. And in those videos I have discussed the law of halal and haram, which is stated in Surah Al-Araf, so please do tune into that. I make the case in those videos that fahisha and itham, which are indecencies and sins, are haram. Those have been made forbidden. And I'm going to, as I said, start from the point that decent music that does not become an addiction or motivate us towards lewdness or any indecencies is perfectly halal. Music holds within it profound power to bring joy and healing, and it is something that I have learned through my experience of caring for my mother-in-law, who now has vascular dementia. We're kind of 4 to 5 years into her dementia, and I've seen the incredible impact that music can have. And I want to link those ideas together for you about music and healing, the positive power of music, because we always hear so much negative stuff about music in Muslim spaces. Pakistan is my country of origin. As you know, I'm a Pakistani woman. I'm very proud of my identity and who I am and where I hail from. And I do remember a very different Pakistan when I was growing up from the Pakistan that I now experience when I go back. And until the harsh and austere ideologies of Salafism and Wahhabism disrupted the Islam of living and breathing communities in Pakistan, and until it hardened people's hearts and turned them into judgmental Muslims, listening to beautiful music or reciting poetry were part of family life. And Urdu and Punjabi, which are my mother tongues, are very rich languages. They're very poetic languages. They're very emotive languages. And you find that for storytelling and for writing verse and song, they're absolutely beautiful languages. Just always dripping with emotion, and they're just imbued with so much wisdom and so much moral wisdom as well. And so poetry and music were inextricably woven into our family lives, into our daily existence. You know, over cups of tea, or when we were out eating chips with our friends or whatever. Even as teenagers, I remember we used to just sit together and recite poetry, verses to each other. We used to play this game where whichever letter or word you finished your poetry on, the next person had to pick up the same word and start and recall a verse that started from that word. It was quite a challenging game. So we used to know poetry from famous poets by heart. You know, it was something we really enjoyed, and we used to admire people who had incredible, perfect recall of poetry, especially from Allama Iqbal and Faiz and Ahmad Faraz and Nasir Ali Kazmi and other poets that we used to read. And our older generation used to listen to ghazals all the time. And I remember, they always hated pop music. So my parents would always say, what is this music that you listen to? It's all nonsense. Look at the music. Listen to the music we listen to. It's so profound. And they were right about that. I sometimes go back to that music that they used to listen to. And again, at dinner table, with family conversations, you'll have family gathered around and somebody would say, oh, have you listened to this latest ghazal, this latest song that has been sung by person so-and-so, they're such a famous singer. And the whole family would gather around and we would listen to beautiful music. It was just part of our daily existence. And people used to praise the best singers, who were the masters in singing, because this is very complex lyrical structures that they would articulate so beautifully through the singing. So we appreciated cultural expression, and we did that without judgment. It was something to take joy in. And then only recently, I would say in about 20 years or so, these hammer-like fatwas of music is haram have reached our society. And they reached us from these neo-revivalist groups who have created such an ugly interpretation of Islam that it feels that Muslim souls have been turned to ash, just cold and grey. We've hardened our hearts because we're no longer exposed to these sublime arts. And these neo-revivalist interpretations, which are so black and white, so harsh, there's no gray in them, they're not able to be nuanced enough to understand that there are different types of music, and some music is perfectly fine and other types of music may not be fine because of the content of what is written and recited, or because of the context in which that music is playing. And they're not able to bring those nuances in, so you'll get these blunt hammer-like fatwas that music is haram. And all aesthetic experience then becomes banned, whether you're writing poetry, whether you're singing, you're creating music, you're capturing beauty in paintings, or you're wearing colorful clothes. All of these sublime expressions just land people straight into hellfire. That is how these fatwas reach us. Music is haram, poetry is haram, drawing is haram. And if you engage in any of these aesthetic expressions, these creative expressions, then you're just going to end up in hellfire. But I'm old enough to remember when things were different, and we had music all around us, and we could let its softness shape our hearts and minds. And I really admire actually the cultural rebellion that I see in Pakistan. I do see it as a very effective form of rebellion, where with initiatives like Coke Studio and other initiatives, people are reviving our cultural roots, our folklore, our beautiful poetry that comes from the earth, from the land itself, from ancient wisdoms. These are ancient civilizations, ancient societies. We go back 5,000-8,000 years. So we have all of this richness of heritage. And I love initiatives like Coke Studio, which fuse the modern with the traditional and the ancient. It is actually rebellion to these really harsh, austere rulings and fatwas that we get from these groups. So I love that. I love that rebellion. My mother-in-law, who I mentioned at the start, she also grew up in a very kind country, in a country where people had soft souls, and they didn't spend their time or their waking hours condemning other fellow Muslims to hell. That was not a sport, that was not a social sport played at that time. And she has lived with us for a long time. I know her, I knew her as a brave and confident woman, a feminist in many ways, but with very strong family values and a fierce independence of mind. And 4 years now into her dementia, she's very much a diminished version of herself, and that's quite sad to see. But kind of the old flashes of herself and who she was, her personality comes out from time to time. And it's really brilliant to see that, and alhamdulillah, she's still verbal, she's still able to take care of her personal needs, and long may that continue, that she maintains her independence, and we try our very best to support with that. But there are days when she can be absent-minded, there can be weeks of confusion and distress. Sometimes you feel that she's kind of almost in oblivion, not quite with you. She would hardly exchange a sentence even sitting next to you. But then there are moments when she's very lucid and very, very lively and full of energy. So as you would expect by now, I love books, so I'm sure I've said this before, and the last 4 years then I've spent a lot of time researching dementia. I've read a lot of books about dementia, I've done a lot of online research on this as well. And a couple of years ago I came across a Facebook post that somebody had shared which mentioned a curated playlist which had been created by BBC Urdu, and it's called BBC Music Memories, Top 50 Pakistani Memorable Songs. This was part of the BBC World Service Music Memories project, and they created similar playlists from across different languages and countries, and they released them on World Alzheimer's Day 2020. So the BBC has done this amazing thing. By the way, I'm really grateful for them for doing that, because actually all of that work is based on really sound scientific research. And the reason why the BBC has done that is because research is showing that music can bring healing, it can bring solace, it can bring joy and vitality to dementia sufferers. I've also watched the actor Vicky McClure's documentary where she shows the healing power of music. So she works with dementia sufferers, and she set up a charity as well, which is the Dementia Choir. I've added the link to that in the description of the video. And she's done a documentary where she demonstrates, it's a very moving documentary, and she demonstrates the hugely positive impact that music has on dementia sufferers. I also came across the opinion when I was writing the notes for this episode, doing some research. I came across a blog by Alistair Burns, who's an expert in old age psychiatry at the University of Manchester, and he's also served as NHS England's National Clinical Director for Dementia. And he writes that music can have many benefits in the setting of dementia. It can help reduce anxiety and depression, help maintain speech and language, is helpful at the end of life, it enhances quality of life, and it has a positive impact on carers. So it seems that music is able to connect the neurons in a dementia patient's brain in such a way that those neurons can fire with potency and accuracy. It's kind of like it almost revives, it injects some energy into those neurons. And listening to music, as we now know, and lots of science is now coming out because we can do better imaging of the human brain now. And you can see which bits of the brain light up. And lots of research is now coming out which shows that listening to music is an extremely complex cognitive process, and it also evolves the emotional centers in our brain. And creating music is even more difficult. And this is why we see around us that it requires years of mastery and years of practice to reach excellence. And the most magical symphonies are absolute works of genius, and they endure. We have symphonies from great masters from centuries ago, and they're just beautiful pieces of work. And one of the other interesting things that has just come out is that if you learn a musical instrument late in life, especially in your 50s, when you hit middle age, then that reduces the chance of developing dementia by 30%. So it's hugely significant, the role that music can play in reviving our capacity, kind of our cognitive capacity, and our ability to retain our cognitive capacity. So music does literally heal the brain, or where the brain has entered a degenerative disease, it can slow down that disease, or it can bring moments of solace and joy to the person who's suffering from that disease. So it literally heals the brain. But what is the most, I suppose, the most moving for me, and it's one of those light bulb moments when something like that happens, is the impact music can have on a person's well-being. So a couple of years ago, we were traveling to Manchester to meet family, and I put on the BBC playlist. My mother-in-law finds car journeys quite difficult. She's very restless when she's sitting in the car. She doesn't know what to do with herself. She's in a confined space and feels quite agitated. So anyway, I put on the BBC playlist in our car, and this incredible magic happened. She immediately kind of snapped to attention. I don't think she was paying much attention to her surroundings. She looked a bit absent-minded, so she immediately snapped to attention. And then she started gently clapping to the tunes. She always does that when we put music on, music that she's familiar with. And then we saw this astonishing clarity of recall. So she started to sing along all the songs, and her recall of the lyrics was perfect. She did not miss a single word when she was recalling the lyrics. And then a couple of minutes in, 3 or 4 minutes in, the music triggered her memory. So she started telling us stories about her childhood home. She tends to go back to her childhood home and her teenage quite a bit now. And she was telling us about when her eldest brother bought a new radio for her father. And this was a new gadget. Nobody had seen a radio before. So this was magic happening, to have a radio. And her father used to switch the radio on and leave it on the boundary wall on the roof. Now, I don't know if you've seen how houses are built in Pakistan, but we have flat roofed houses. So we have these big, massive flat roofs, and they're very much social spaces. So families and children spend a lot of time on the roof. And especially in hot weather, some families will also sleep outdoors overnight. So they tend to then put kind of beds on all the bedding on the roofs as well. So anyway, he would put the radio on the boundary wall on the roof. And because the roofs in a neighborhood are quite connected or quite close to each other, other people also pick up the music. So my mother-in-law was telling me that their neighbors would shout and say, "Can you please turn up the volume on your radio so we can also enjoy the music?" So the whole thing used to become a communal activity, and everybody would partake in it. And so for the 1 hour it took us in the car, we listened to her singing along to those songs. She recalled her memory of famous celebrities and singers. It was crisp, clear memory, and also very vivid memories of a happy childhood, spent in her home. And I'm sure that many of you who are carers, whether you're looking after a child who's unwell or whether you're looking after elderly parents or elderly relatives, you will have had similar experiences. Mothers sing to their children to soothe them. It's such a part of being a mum, is humming a tune to them, soothing your children. And we sing songs of joy, we have songs of sorrow at different moments in our lives. And listening to music really can conjure up memories long buried in our psyche, and that's its power. I'm also struck by the fact that Allah's great prophet David, Dawud alayhi salam, was blessed with great musical talent. Now, he used to play an ancient musical instrument. It's called the harp or lyre, and it's a string. It's got a set of strings and then a sound box at the bottom. Now, in the Old Testament, we come across an incident where David plays he's playing the lyre to bring calm and solace to the tormented soul of King Saul. So it's really interesting that we hear this incident where music is bringing calm to somebody. Now in the Qur'an, Allah says in Surah Al-Isra in chapter 17 verse 55, "And it is your Lord that knoweth best all beings that are in the heavens and on earth. We did bestow on some prophets more and other gifts than on others, and we gave to David the gift of the Psalms." And what are the Psalms? The Psalms are a collection of 150 lyrical poems, and 73 of those, about half of those, are linked to David, to Dawud alayhi salam. They are very emotive. They record within them the lament of the oppressed, and they invoke Allah's majesty as the creator. So the Psalms are poetry and song of a great prophet of God. And somehow, in our hammer-like fatwas against music, we forget what our own religious tradition, what the revelation of God tells us about these things. So let us not shun and make haram the zinat Allah, the beautiful things that Allah has created. Music has the power to uplift, to soften our hearts, to invoke emotion, to bring back memory, and to heal. What we should shun is the harshness of the austere, who've become the self-proclaimed guardians of Islam and who have burnt to ashes the balance, sublimity and beauty of our religion. Assalamu alaykum.